Okay, folks, lecture number 17. Next time we get together, you'll have your second examination. I want to have a few minutes left in class period so I can review you for that exam. Last time we were together, we were talking about the Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson, of course, was victorious at that battle. We also talked about the treaty that ended that war, which was the Treaty of Ghent, which was actually signed 16 days before the battle at New Orleans. Somewhere through here, we identified some of the problems that the War of 1812 had encountered, such as that of a financial institution, or the lack thereof, anyway. And we mentioned that of the Second Bank of the United States. More on that later in this class period. All right, we talked about improvements in transportation with that of the National Road, the extension of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. New states were formed, and you have those in front of you here, but that would include Indiana, Illinois, Mississippi, and Alabama. A new presidential election will take place in 1816. James Monroe will defeat the Federalist candidate, Rufus King, and that will be the end of the Federalist Party. By the end of this class period, we're going to see an end to another political party. James Monroe, with the era of good feelings, won the presidential election of 1820 as he went unopposed. We also saw the Adams-Onassa Treaty. You need to recognize that. We gave up all territorial demands to Texas, but on the other hand, for $5 million, we got Florida and we got the Pacific Northwest, north of the 42nd parallel. All right, we moved on here. And we talked about the Missouri Compromise, and it was passed and confirmed in 1820. Somewhere through here we went through John Quincy Adams being elected president in 1824 with rather questionable results on that. Andrew Jackson, who probably should have won that presidential election in 1824, referred to this period as the time of the corrupt bargain. Henry Clay was the Judas of the West here. Finally, in 1828, Andrew Jackson wins this presidential election here, folks. The era of the common man, the age of Jackson. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get right into that. And I want to show you what Andrew Jackson appeared as. Here he is right here. I think I showed this to you the last time that he was together. Take a good close look at that. Old Hickory is what they referred to him as. And I'm going to go back to my camera here, and let's take a look at some of the other photographs here of Andrew Jackson. And like I said, he was the 7th president of the United States. I'll show the photographs in just a few minutes here. Born in the year 1767. He'll die in 1845. We shall all meet again in heaven, were his final words. He is a Democrat, one of the founder of the Democratic Party here. You can look at a number of photographs in your portraits in your textbook. Here's one, Old Hickory, dressed in his general uniform here. Here's another likeness here of Andrew Jackson. I do not know the name of that horse. And if you get a chance to travel up to the area of Nashville, be sure and work it into your schedule to go by the Hermitage, or Hermitage as they would pronounce it in some countries anyway, home of Andrew Jackson. You'll also find his wife, Rachel Donaldson Jackson, who is buried on those premises along with the general itself. Andrew Jackson had about 300 slaves, by the way. And if you look at the Hermitage, here's what it looks like. I think it's rather expensive to go in. There was a time a few years ago where you could go up to the house and go through the grounds there without paying the price of a ticket, but I understand today that it is not that way. All right, we go back to Andrew Jackson here for a second here, folks. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Born in 1767. Oops, let me get that where you can see this. Born in 1767. Too young for the Revolutionary War. His mother raised him, wanted him to be a preacher, but he could outcuss every kid in the neighborhood, so that just didn't work out. And anyway, he learned to read and write at an early age, but on the other hand, he was a very poor speller, very poor writer. Some of the neighborhood kids convinced him when he was at a young age to fire a shotgun, and this weapon did not have a shotgun round in it, but it was double loaded with with gunpowder, and it actually knocked him flat on his posterior, if you know what I'm talking about. Immediately he jumped up and yelled to his friends, "I'll kill the first one of you that laughs." So anyway, that's the kind of nature with Andrew Jackson. Take a close look at him right here. He was our only president to be a prisoner of war. He was too young for the Revolutionary Revolutionary War, but he did serve as a messenger boy. And so he was at a young age here, around the age 11, 12 years of age. He was actually captured by the British. Knowing the nature of Andrew Jackson, when a British officer told Jackson to polish the boots of the British officer, Jackson told him what he could do with the boots. And the British officer brandished a saber and cut Andrew Jackson across the hand and across the face. And it's a wonder that the slash did not kill him there. All right, so anyway, let's move on with this here. Andrew Jackson was enormously popular. Everywhere he went, huge crowds would gather. They referred to as King Mom. King Mom. Quite a popular president, and it was inaugurated in 1829 on March the 4th. That was the inauguration dates there. Andrew Jackson at that time was in mourning. His wife, Rachel, she'd been referred to during the campaign as the American Jezebel, and it so killed her spirit that she actually died a couple of weeks after the election took place. And when she was buried in what would be her inauguration gown. But huge crowds gathered there within the White House. Jackson was dressed totally in black hat on. He had a ribbon around the hat, which was called a weeper. He had a black sash that went around his waist. His suit was completely black. This was a man that was in mourning. When Andrew Jackson would go to bed at night, he would take a portrait of his wife Rachel and put it next to him so that when he awakened in the morning, that portrait would be right there, the first thing that he would see. How touching is that? Let's go back to my camera here, folks, and let's move on with Andrew Jackson. Now, before 1820, very few people voted in elections in our country. You had to pay taxes, you had to be a property owner, which that excluded about 90% of the population here. But by the 1820s, we will see more and more people voting in these elections, but still at a quite small number here. For Andrew Jackson, he was no philosopher. Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party was not a Thomas Jefferson republic, and they believed in a simple, distinct theory of democracy that would offer equal protection and equal benefits to all white citizens and favor no region or class above the other. For Andrew Jackson, he targeted the office buildings and the office holders here. And he believed that the offices belonged to the people here. One individual who was a supporter said that to the victor belonged the spoils. And Andrew Jackson was a practitioner of the spoils system. I'm sure you probably figured this out. You do me a favor, I'll do you a favor. You give me a political favor, give me a political contribution, and I'll appoint you to some federal position. That is known as the spoils system. I have to say in all fairness that Thomas Jefferson and most of our other presidents did engage in the spoils system. Thank goodness we do not have that system in place today. And I say that facetiously. All right, the vice president under Andrew Jackson was John C. Calhoun. If you're following in your textbook on page 236, you can see a likeness of John C. Calhoun. And I'm not going to throw my camera over in that direction. I'll just leave that up to you. Kind of looks like Dr. Emmett Brown, if you will, on Back to the Future. I think he does anyway. And maybe at another time I'll show you another likeness there of John C. Calhoun. All right, so he is the vice president under Andrew Jackson. The secretary of state under Andrew Jackson is Martin Van Buren. They actually got along very, very well, Martin Van Buren. If you look on the adjacent page there, you can see a likeness there of Martin Van Buren. I'll show you another one later in the class period here. He was from Kinderhook, New York. People gave him many, many nicknames. They called him the Flying Dutchman. They called him the what else was Old Kinderhook. And if you look at the name here, Old Kinderhook, he is okay. He is okay. And he had many, many other nicknames associated with that, too. Stood 5'6", I believe it was anyway. There it is, Kinderhook, New York. If you get a chance to visit there, be sure to stop by the home of Martin Van Buren. And I'll show you what it looks like when we get to Martin Van Buren later in the class period. Now, Andrew Jackson also had in addition to his official cabinet, he had his unofficial cabinet. That cabinet is referred to as his kitchen cabinet. Martin Van Buren, close friends with that of Andrew Jackson. Seems kind of odd. We have a southerner, we have a northerner, and they were very good with each other here. But Martin Van Buren was a member of Andrew Jackson's regular cabinet and was a member of Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet. So anyway, and not too much more on that for the time being here. All right, let's move right along here. And another individual, and you can see his likeness in your textbook, one of the finest speakers our country has ever produced. A man by the name of Daniel Webster. He's on that same page as in your textbook as the photograph is of Martin Van Buren. He had jet black eyes, or so they said. dark complexion, so they referred to him as Black Dan. He's from Massachusetts, one of the finest politicians, one of the finest speakers our country has ever produced there. You can read in your textbook about the Webster-Haney debate. I don't have time to go through that there, but it is kind of an interesting thing. Now I want to talk to you about something that's kind of a difficult subject here to fully understand. Remember now, John C. Calhoun is the vice president. John C. Calhoun is a loyal American, but John C. Calhoun was first and foremost, he was a South Carolinian, and that is what he self-supported more than anything else. Well, in South Carolina, and for the South had been, shall we say, placed with an unfair tariff, and it was referred to as a tariff of abominations, and I don't want to get into that in great depth here. But under the tariff abominations, it favored the North over the South, and it allowed Southern cotton to be taxed and a tariff to be placed upon that. And so Southerners were unhappy with that. And so anyway, for South Carolina in 1828, they were threatening secession from the Union. And for John C. Calhoun, he came up with his ideas of nullification. And you got to do some deep thinking on this to fully understand nullification. Now, we all know that the states make up the United States of America. So with that in mind, shouldn't the states be able to rule upon the constitutionality of an act of Congress? And if a state feels that an act of Congress was passed and passed unfairly, then the state can nullify that, the theory of nullification. And if that nullification is overridden, then the state has the right to secede from the Union. John C. Calhoun hoped that his theory of nullification never would be put to a test. And you can bet that it's going to, and that's in 1832. South Carolina once again threatens to secede from the Union, and Andrew Jackson, who was a believer in states' rights but a believer in the preservation of the Union, refused to have South Carolina to leave the Union. John C. Calhoun resigned his position as vice president, ran for a Senate position in South Carolina, and was almost unanimously elected to that. Andrew Jackson privately threatened that he would hang John C. Calhoun if he could get his hands around his neck here. All right, so anyway, thankfully we had Henry Clay. I'm going to go back to my camera here. Henry Clay, the great pacificator, here, I'll tie up some words here. The tariff of abominations I mentioned a few minutes ago, the ordinance of nullification. And for Henry Clay, sometimes referred to as a great compromiser, the great pacificator, he was able to smooth things out and lower the tariff on the tariff of abominations so that South Carolina would not secede from the Union here. And anyway, it defused that whole situation here. Kind of a black mark in the history of our country. Now, Andrew Jackson was no friend of the Native Americans, of the Indians. And unfortunately, he took the position, like most Americans at that time, that the best place for the Native Americans was to move west of the Mississippi River there and remove east of the Mississippi from Indian possessions whatsoever. All right, now several wars are going to take place here, and I want to mention one here, which is called the Black Hawk War. Black Hawk War, which took place in 1831, 1832. I'm looking around for an article here on this. I'm going to slide this under the camera here. Let's see if we can see what this is. Black Hawk War of 1832. And it broke out with a group of Indians, which were called the Black Hawk Indians, and they actually lived in Iowa. All right, so when they lived in Iowa, they previously left Illinois. And so they didn't like the land in Iowa, so they went back to Illinois. Well, Illinois was a state in the United States of America at that time. So many people felt like the Indian presence there in Illinois was a threat to them, was a danger to them. And thus we're going to see that the Black Hawk War will break out here, and it's not much of a war in the way of Black Hawk Indians trying to fight. They were actually trying to escape the Illinois militia. Abraham Lincoln, by the way, was a captain in the Illinois militia and a regular army. And by the way, Jefferson Davis was a lieutenant in the regular army, which is so very odd there because we have Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln serving under the same flag, fighting against the Indians there. And Nevertheless, here we'll find that the Black Hawk Indians were attempting to cross the river, and the military closed in on them, and they fired artillery into them and killed a number of Black Hawk's followers there. Black Hawk and his son, Whirling Thunder, were actually captured here, and you can see their photographs in the textbook. In fact, let me go back here to my camera here for the Black Hawk War, and I'm looking around for this, and here we can see a likeness here. Let's get this contrasted right. Whirling Thunder is here over on this side, and here's his father, Black Hawk, who was the leader of the Black Hawk Indians, sometimes referred to as Black Sparrowhawk, by the way. But they were taken as captives, and literally it was like caged animals were placed in a wagon and just taken around the country on an expedition. And it's my understanding they even met Andrew Jackson there. All right, so anyway, and that's two of those individuals. Now let's move on here. We also had the 5 civilized tribes. Now these were tribes that were found in the southeast. I want you to remember this. You need to know these. We had these tribes, which were the Cherokee Indians, the Choctaw Indians, the Chickasaw Indians, the Creek Indians, and the Seminole Indians. All right, the 5 civilized tribes. I want you to recognize these. I tell my class, face to face anyway, we have a C, a C, a C, a C, and it sounds like a C. Sounds like a C. If you're following in your textbook, you can see the map of where these Indian tribes were located here. And let's see if I wrote it down here, and I did. Congress passed in 1830 what was called the Removal Act. And under the Removal Act, this would allow government funds to purchase Indian land. In other words, you would buy the land from the Native Americans, and the Native Americans would be moved out west of the Mississippi River. Now, where they're going to be moved to, and I don't feel like going back to my camera here, I'll do this in a second here, folks, but where they would be moved to was to the area which is called the Indian Territory. And I will back up on what I said a second ago. I want to go back here, and I will show you where the Indian Territory is. So let's see if I can find it here, get my map adjusted right here. And where the Indian Territory will be, it's this territory, which is right here. And don't read my word here, which says Arkansas. Most of you probably recognize this state here today. That is the state of Oklahoma. But at that time, what it was referred to as, it was called the Indian Territory. And for all of these tribes here, under the 5 civilized tribes, with the exception of the Cherokee, all their land will be purchased here, and the Choctaw and Chickasaw and the Creek, and some of the Seminole, who are in the northern parts of Florida, will actually be removed and will be forced over to the Indian Territory. Today, if you visit that area, and I was there last summer, but if you visit that area today, you can actually find the independent Indian nations there, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and some Seminole that were present there. All right, they have separate Indian nations, just like the United States of America here. Well, what's going to take place, however, is the Cherokee Indians refuse to leave. All right, I didn't mean for you to see that, and I might as well show it to you now. And the Cherokee Indians refused to leave. And so the years moved on, and by this time the Cherokee Indians have actually developed, they have a written alphabet, written language, a written alphabet. They've developed their own constitution. They declared themselves an independent Cherokee Indian nation. Actually, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Marshall, recognized them as having an independent nation. Andrew Jackson, of course, did not do that. And finally, as the years went on, well, one of the Cherokee Indians, and he was not an elected official to the Cherokee Indian Nation, felt like that no better deal could be gained, and so he agreed to sell the Cherokee Indian Territory. And what the United States was looking for, we only wanted an agreement. We just wanted a signature. But this individual was not an elected official. It would be like me, Alan Rowland, trying to sell Jasper, Alabama, in which I don't have the authority to do so. But once the United States felt like that they had a legitimate signature on this, then the Indians, the Native Americans, the Cherokees were literally forced at bayonet point off of their territory here. And they're going to be moved out into the Indian Territory that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and what is referred to as the Trail of Tears. It takes place in 1838. Some of you may have heard of this before. These Indians, as a tragic affair, were led away. I'm going to share a couple of things with you here. Here we have in this article here, the Trail of Tears. It's just a sad period of time for us. The Native Americans, the Cherokees, referred to it as Trail Where They Cried. If you are traveling through the northern parts of Alabama, particularly southern parts of Tennessee, you can actually trace the Trail of Tears, the original route that they actually went upon. A very popular portrait that's found in the textbooks anyway, a lot of history textbooks, showing you the Trail of Tears that is taking place here under military escort. And for many of these people here, they were poorly clothed, it was cold weather, and they were subject to the adversities of the elements there. And a great number of these Cherokee Indians died on that Trail of Tears. All right, and like I said, when you go out there today to the areas of Oklahoma, you can actually see all of that. Okay, here we go as we continue on here through the Indian Territory. Oklahoma is where it is. Now, one group of Native Americans, which were Seminoles, some of them held out. Some did go out to the Indian Territory, but some did not do so. And this group was led by Osceola. Osceola was a mixed race. I think his father was a Creek Indian, I believe it was anyway. And anyway, Osceola and a number of his Seminoles, along with several hundred African slaves, actually made their way down to the Everglades, to hide away in the Everglades there. And this is going to create what is referred to as the Second Seminole War. And for Andrew Jackson, we're going to spend, over the course of 7 years, from 1835 to 1842, we're going to spend $20 million at the cost of 1,500 lives trying to track down these Seminole Indians under Osceola. And we never did. I mean, we finally just gave up on it. On one occasion, we did trick Osceola into coming in for a talk with us, and the United States, as nice as we are, we took Osceola into custody there. Osceola was placed in prison, sent out to Fort Moultrie, that's where I was telling you about with Sergeant William Jasper anyway, and was taken out there, placed in a prison cell. Here's a likeness here of Osceola, and that's where he died there. Today, if you visit there, I don't feel like thumbing through the pages here because it would kind of clutter things up, but if you visit there today, you can actually find the burial site there of Osceola. And several years ago, I believe it was back in the 1950s, the body of Osceola was exhumed, and when they opened up the coffin and looked inside, the head was missing. And so that's the subject of this article right here, Osceola's head, what happened to him, and we really, to this day, we don't know. Now, this is a death mask. That's a plaster cast that was made of the head of Osceola after he died. So that's what he looked like, but as far as what happened to his head, I just really don't know here, folks. Okay, so I need you to recognize that name, Osceola. Osceola. Okay, so that pretty much is it for, I'm not through for the day, but that's pretty much it. As far as the Native Americans ended up giving up 32 million acres of land. I'm sorry, the Indians gave up 100 million acres of land, and they got in the Indian Territory, they ended up getting $32 million. And we, being nice in the United States, we paid these Indian tribes $68 million. We paid them $1 an acre for their land. Now, another thing with Andrew Jackson, it's a complicated subject here, folks, was that Andrew Jackson's bank war. Now, Andrew Jackson was no friend of the banks. Andrew Jackson had lost his wealth. He had been a very wealthy man, but in the panic of 1797, he had lost his wealth, and he was very distrustful of banks, very distrustful of paper money. Andrew Jackson, like many at that time, believed in payment in specie, that is in gold, and that is in silver here. So, no friend of the National Bank. The National Bank was headquartered, the Second National Bank was headquartered in Philadelphia. It has something like 67 branch banks. The United States government controlled 20% of the stock in the bank, and almost all of the United States deposits were deposited directly into the Bank of the United States in Philadelphia. All right, now the bank president at that time was a man by the name of Nicholas Biddle. I want you to remember the name Nicholas Biddle. He had been the bank president since 1823. The bank charter was scheduled to expire in 1836. Now, Nicholas Biddle, sometimes referred to as Czar Biddle, sometimes referred to as Bully Nick, was a good banker, as a matter of fact. I don't think I would like the guy, but he was a pretty good banker. Now, to support the bank, he was granting quick loans. I don't think there was anything wrong, but he was granting quick loans, easy access to money to some prominent politicians like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun and Daniel Webster that I mentioned to you earlier. Those individuals were largely gamblers, like to do a lot of horse race gambling here. And as you well know, if you gamble a lot, you're going to lose money here. Now, I don't think there was anything out of order with this, but these individuals I mentioned there had developed a pretty good relationship with Nicholas Biddle. He would give them quick loans. They, in turn, would allow for favorable passage of bills that would be favorable for the bank itself. All right, so what Henry Clay and Daniel Webster did, they encouraged Nicholas Biddle to apply 4 years early for a bank renewal of their contract here, to renew the charter of the bank. And Andrew Jackson had already sworn that he was not going to renew the charter in 1836 when the charter expired there. So when Congress passed it, the bank rechartering bill went over to the president's desk, and the president vetoed it, just like that. So now this bank issue is going to become the central focus in the 1832 presidential election. And Andrew Jackson swore, he said, the bank, I'll kill it, after this too. So back we go here, folks, and let's move on to our presidential election of 1832, and this is what we have here for Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson is a Democrat. If you can't read my abbreviation there, that's MVB, Martin Van Buren, and the Republican candidate will be Henry Clay. It's not much of an election here. Andrew Jackson picks up 219 electoral votes, Henry Clay 49, 55% to 42% in the popular vote. So Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren win this presidential election. And I'll tell you, I don't know if I wrote it here, folks, with that is going to be the end of the Republican Party. So the Republican Party is out. The Republican Party we have today, it will be created in the 1850s anyway. All right, so how do you close a bank? How do you close a bank? So what Andrew Jackson did, he went to his Secretary of the Treasury, and he told his Secretary of the Treasury, I want you to take federal monies that are going to be supposed to be deposited into the Bank of the United States, and instead of that, I want you to deposit in smaller banks, which he calls state banks. So I think it will be better if I try to illustrate it like this, and let's forget the name up there, Roger B. Taney, at the start here. I'll come back to it in a second. And so what he told his first Secretary of the Treasury, he said, I want you to take these bank deposits and don't place them in the Bank of the United States, but place them down here in these state banks, in these pet banks. And his Secretary of Treasury said, Mr. President, that is not a smart thing to do. And the president said, well, I'm sorry you see things that way. I have no further need for your services. And he appointed a new Secretary of Treasury, and the same thing happened. And then on the third occasion, Andrew Jackson appointed this man, who was a close friend of Andrew Jackson. I want you to remember his name. It's Roger Taney. Roger B. Taney. He's from Maryland, by the way. You can actually go through a town in Maryland called Tinytown, and that's the way it's pronounced, Taney. And it's not Taney. If you go outside the courthouse, outside the State House in Annapolis, Maryland, you'll see a statue there of Roger B. Taney. And he told Mr. Taney, he said, here's what I want you to do here, Secretary of the Treasury. I want you to take these federal holdings, federal deposits, and place them in these state banks. And Roger B. Taney said, sure, no problem. And then Andrew Jackson went to him. He said, I want you to take federal holdings that are present in the Bank of the United States and pull those out and send them down to these state banks. And Roger B. Taney saluted like a good Secretary of the Treasury, and he said, no problem. So you can see what's going to happen here. They are going to close this Bank of the United States. And to not make this a long story here, folks, the Bank of the United States closed its doors in 1836. I don't think this was a good thing, and we are left without a sound financial institution here for the next 80 years. So the Second National Bank closed in 1836. So many people in our country now began to refer to Andrew Jackson as King Andrew. And we're going to see a new political party to form. And this will be a political party that will take the place of the Republican Party. So we have Andrew Jackson with the Democrats, and we have another political party which is called the Whig Party. The Whig Party. The Whig Party, it has some of the characteristics very similar, in my opinion anyway, to that of the old Federalist Party. You know, quite popular with the New England area. The Democrats were popular in the West, and were popular down in the South here. All right, so that's the situation here. So let's take a look at the presidential election of 1836. And for the Democrats, they will run Martin Van Buren, handpicked by Andrew Jackson here. And for the Whigs just don't have their act together here, folks. And they felt like if they nominated ran three candidates, William Henry Harrison, Hugh White, and Daniel Webster, that they would surely achieve a victory here. But let me tell you good folks something. The best way to lose a presidential election is to split your party. If you do that, and that's exactly what the Whigs did, and that's exactly what happened, they lost this presidential election. Martin Van Buren had 170 electoral votes, and we had William Henry Harrison, Hugh White, and Daniel Webster all combined with independents, too, to have 124. So who wins this presidential election in 1836? And it is Martin Van Buren. All right, so let me take this back here, folks, and I'm going to show you what he looks like here. And there's Martin Van Buren here. Old Kinderhook, not a very tall individual here. I think a pretty good president, I think anyway. An intelligent individual, had a long history of being in politics. He was our first president that was actually born in the United States. All our other presidents were born in the colonies that were under Great Britain, but he was actually born in the United States here. All right, I'm going to shift over here and get out a couple of things for you folks here. And I'm sorry to move around like that, but if you get a chance to go up to Kinderhook, New York, you can, let's see, that's not going to be good, and I apologize for that, so let me put it like this. But you can go by his home there, which is called Lindenwald. This is a National Park Service brochure. You can actually buy your ticket and go inside that house here. I was too cheap to do that, so I just went up into the windows and looked in. This is what it looks like here. This is what his house looks like here, Lindenwald. There's no reason to buy your ticket unless you just want to. You just look in all the windows, you know. And anyways, it's kind of nice, And when you're in Kinderhook, just travel about 2 miles away from where Lindenwald is located there, and go by the old public cemetery that's located in Kinderhook, and you can see the very simple marker there to Martin Van Buren. All right, so shall we move right along? Now, from 1835 to 1837, it was the only time in United States history that we have not had a national debt. And wouldn't that be nice? I don't think we'll ever see a period of time where we don't have a national debt here, folks. And I forget what it is now. In fact, the last time I lost track of it, it was $21 trillion. I'm sure it is way, way over that now anyway. So what Martin Van Buren decided to do, if we have no national debt, and we actually have, there's no national bank, and we have the surplus money here in the state banks, let's just take that surplus money in the state banks and let's give it back to the states. Doesn't that make sense? I think that makes perfect sense. And so what the federal government attempted to do is to take federal holdings, move them out of these state banks, and move it down and give it back to the states itself. Well, for the bank presidents of these state banks, they began to panic, call in loans, and by golly here, folks, we went into the worst depression in United States history, which is the Panic of 1837. And right or wrong, whenever we have a recession or depression, who gets the blame? And you know who gets the blame, and that's the President of the United States. All right, so we're going to move into our next presidential election here, and this is the presidential election of 1840. It would be your last presidential election in this block of instruction. Martin Van Buren ran without a vice president. Let the electors choose the vice president. And Martin Van Buren, by this time he's now referred to as Martin Van Ruin instead of Martin Van Buren, because we are in a national panic, a national depression here. And for the Whigs get it right. They're going to run a person by the name of William Henry Harrison. He'll have his vice presidential running mate, a former Republican, a former Democrat by the name of John Tyler. John Tyler is from Virginia here. And in this campaign, it was brilliantly done here. And for the Whig Party made Martin Van Buren look like he was a person that had a sophisticated taste here. He used cologne. He drank the finest European wines and the finest European champagnes. His meals were prepared by a French chef. He ate his meals off gold dishes. He sat on seats that were covered in silk. And then for this side here, they tried to represent William Henry Harrison, who incidentally was an aristocrat, but they tried to portray him, William Henry Harrison, of having been raised in a log cabin. He ate hog meat and grits, and he liked hard ciders. He is just a regular person here. And this log cabin campaign worked brilliantly here, folks. So William Henry Harrison has 234 electoral votes. Martin Van Buren has 60 electoral votes. And you can read the popular vote here, 53% to 47% here. So who is elected president here? And that is none other than William Henry Harrison. So let me get a likeness here of William Henry Harrison. This is what he looks like here. Position it for you good folks here. He was inaugurated 30 days later. After his inauguration, he had contracted pneumonia, and he died here. And with that, we'll see that John Tyler, and here's John Tyler, which will now become the President of the United States. John Tyler, who had been a former Democrat. He is a Whig in Democrats' clothing here, folks. Every member of his cabinet resigned except Daniel Webster, and Daniel Webster later resigned here. One thing I remember about John Tyler, he had 15 children between two wives. His last wife, he was 54 years old, and she was 24 years of age, too. And anyway, not a very effective president there. Alrighty, folks, we're about time to shut down here, and I want to go ahead and prepare another video for you, which will cover the review for this for the second block of instruction. Okay, thank you very much.